When Daniel met Miriam, he had nothing but promises. Not the kind people make when they are sure of themselves, but the kind whispered by someone who knows they might fail and still dares to hope. She loved him anyway. She loved him when he borrowed bus fare and swore he'd pay it back. She loved him when he said, "Just one more month," and that month became a year. She loved him when his dreams were louder than his results. And Daniel noticed, not loudly, not dramatically, but he noticed. When his mother fell sick, it was Miriam who slept on the plastic chair at the hospital, rubbing his back while pretending not to be tired. When his phone rang with rejection calls, it was Miriam who said, "At least they noticed you." When he finally got his first real job, it was Miriam who cried harder than he did. Gratitude grew in him like a quiet debt. And gratitude, when it stays too long, can turn into pressure. Daniel wanted to become more than the man Miriam believed in. He wanted to become someone who didn't need believing in anymore. Success came slowly at first, then all at once. Money changed the way people laughed at his jokes. Influence changed the way rooms waited for him to speak. And attention arrived without asking permission. That was when he met Clara. Clara didn't know the old Daniel. She didn't know the nights he cried into Miriam's shoulder. She didn't know the shame of borrowing or the fear of failing. Clara only knew the man who had arrived. With her, Daniel felt admired, not remembered, and that difference mattered more than he admitted. The betrayal didn't happen in one moment. It happened in choices so small they felt harmless. Late meetings, unread messages, a smile held a second too long, a lie told once, then reused. When Miriam finally asked, she didn't accuse. She asked softly, "Are you still here with me?" Daniel said yes. That was the deepest betrayal of all. She found out the way most people do, not through confession, but through silence that no longer fit the room. She didn't scream, she didn't fight. She packed her things slowly. Before she left, she said only one sentence. "I was grateful for who you were becoming. I just didn't know it required my absence." Years passed. Daniel became everything he once dreamed of. But success has a strange way of echoing when there's no one left to share it with. Clara eventually left too. Admiration fades when it has nothing left to admire. One evening, Daniel sat alone in a quiet house that was too big for one person. He realized something too late. Love had stayed with him when he had nothing. Gratitude had tried to remind him. Betrayal had cost him the only person who loved him without conditions. And regret. Regret arrived on time. It always does. But unlike Miriam, regret never leaves. Daniel thought regret would come loudly. He imagined tears, breakdowns, a moment where the world would pause long enough for him to understand what he had lost. But regret came softly. It came in the way no one called him when he was sick. In the way his house echoed even when the television was on. In the way achievements felt like props in a play no one attended. Years after Miriam left, he finally saw her again. By accident. She was standing in line at a small bookstore, holding a novel he once promised to read with her. She looked thinner, calmer, like someone who had survived something and learned not to talk about it. Daniel said her name. She turned and smiled, not warmly, not coldly, politely. "How have you been?" she asked. He began to answer, then realized he didn't know which version of himself to present. "I'm good," he said finally. She nodded, satisfied with a truth that didn't require proof. They spoke for less than 5 minutes. No apologies, no explanations, no accusations. When it was time to leave, Daniel said, "I think about you sometimes." Miriam hesitated. Then she said, "I don't." Not cruelly, not proudly, just honestly. That night, Daniel went home and opened his phone. Old messages were gone. Photos erased, voicemails long deleted. He searched his memory instead. But memory is unreliable when it's been starved. Days later, Daniel stood on a balcony overlooking the city he once begged to conquer. He realized something terrifying. His life hadn't fallen apart. It had gone on without punishment. And that was the punishment. Miriam didn't need closure, didn't need revenge, didn't need him to suffer. She had healed, and he had been left exactly where he belonged, successful, admired, and completely irrelevant to the one person who once made him human. Years later, when people spoke about Daniel, they spoke of accomplishments. No one mentioned love. And when Daniel finally understood why that mattered, there was no one left to hear him say, "I'm sorry."